The next day, Rose decided to visit her mother again. Jack had taken the day off, especially, and Maggie was with the neighbors. Rose had decided to pack a picnic to see if Ruth would like to have a trip to the park, if she was feeling up to it. Jack had especially made several cheese, ham, and pickle sandwiches and a few buns for the trip. He had to admit he rather liked Ruth. She was a lovely woman beneath the hard interior, and she obviously loved Megan. Rose stood in front of the mirror and saw her reflection. She wore a tan brown dress, which was 3/4 sleeves, and her hair was down, just a few pieces of her hair pinned up. She applied some lipstick and some perfume before looking back at her reflection. The middle part was uncomfortable. The last time she wore this dress, it fit perfectly, and now it was slightly tight around her abdomen area. Rose knew she gained a little bit of weight, but she hadn't realized it much. Shrugging, she selected a burgundy wrap from the wardrobe and went downstairs to see how Jack was packing the picnic. The weather was slightly cold outside. In fact, it looked like rain. Jack and Rose decided against a picnic and headed for the hospital instead. Their spirits were high, and yesterday they have left them feeling happy about the future. They had walked hand in hand and chattered and laughed like teenagers on a first date. Jack dressed more casually than today in some khaki green colored pants and a brown shirt. He felt almost comfortable and no longer felt out of place. Upon reaching the hospital, it had begun to rain heavily. The murky skies had promised nothing but rain all day. Rose sighed heavily and proceeded to the room. Upon reaching the hospital, it had begun to rain. Of course, Jack entered first, and he had brought Ruth some flowers and was excited about her reaction to them. And they were roses that they smelled lovely. Upon entering, Jack saw no Ruth, and her bed was empty and carefully made. All the flowers and cards which were beside the table were no longer there. Jack frowned. How odd. Rose entered next and saw no Ruth. "Mother?" she shouted, but heard no reply. "Where on earth could she be?" Rose asked. Jack, who just shrugged. Rose felt a sharp pain in her abdomen and ignored it, and carefully walking towards someone to find some information. "Excuse me, sir," Rose shouted, locating a doctor in a white jacket. "I'm looking for my mother. Could you tell me where she is? Her room is empty." "Who is your mother?" "Ruth Dewitt Bulkaker, sir." The doctor's face fell, and he gently took her to a seat. "I'm afraid your mother passed away during the early hours of this morning, ma'am. She was very ill and weak lady." Rose felt a sharp pain in her abdomen even more now. The pain was almost unbearable, but not as unbearable as the pain of losing her mother. "No," was all Rose could manage. "No!" Rose screamed louder, attracting attention from the other visitors and doctors. "Come on, Rose." Jack led Rose to a quiet room, where he attempted to comfort her. "Your mother left this, Miss Dawson, for her family." The doctor offered a large brown envelope to Rose, who just summoned it and looked away icily. Jack took a look at the envelope and thanked the doctor and left them alone. He had never seen Rose this way before. "Rose?" Jack attempted to comfort her, but she shrugged him away. "Rose!" he shouted a bit louder, but she continued to stare into space. She looked and was icy and cruel. She looked up at Jack and almost spat the words. "What?" It sounded like cruel. The memories came rushing back after the disaster, when Jack would attempt to comfort Rose, when she would just shun him away, and it hurt him then, but this was even more now. He had lost Ruth too. He was his mother-in-law, and yesterday had been the best day in a long time. He had grown to like her, and had forward to spending the day with her again. "Rose, don't push me away. I'm grieving too." "Grieving? She wasn't your mother," Jack moaned, almost out of breath. She felt a sharp pain in her stomach yet again, and gasped for air. It felt that as if she was in labor. She screamed slightly, and her breathing grew faster and rapid. "Jack!" she shouted. He offered her his hand and pulled her up, when she had just sat in a patch of blood. Jack glared at her dress and saw that she was covered in blood. Worry struck him and tears poured rapidly from his eyes. He panicked and his heart began to beat as fast. Rose, what's wrong? Rose could feel herself becoming weaker, and that feeling of something between her legs, which with last, a pain struck through her. She had passed out in her husband's arms. Terrified, Jack scooped her in his arms and rushed her out of the room to find a doctor. The same doctor rushed over to her and laid her on a bed in another room. Jack was asked to step outside while the doctors examined her. Jack paced around all for an hour, tears spilled from his eyes. He was terrified of losing Rose too. How could he go on without his wife? How could Megan go on without her mother? Jack thought of all these possible scenarios of what could be wrong. He thought that he was going to lose her. He was shaking so bad. He thought of how Ruth would be worried too if she had been alive and here. He couldn't breathe very well and had to sit down and attempt to gain some control over his body and emotions. Just over an hour, the doctor stepped out of the room, and a somber look on his face. He wrung his hands before glancing over at the spectacles. "I'm afraid your wife has lost a baby," he spoke. Jack squinted through his tears. Rose wasn't pregnant. He thought that he had misheard the doctor. "Baby? What baby?" "Your wife was 5 months pregnant, Mr. Dawson. I thought you knew." Jack shook his head and glanced at the floor. Pain shot through him like he never did before. He just lost his child. His and Rose's child. He hadn't known it existed. They had been so careful so Rose wouldn't become pregnant so soon after Maggie was born. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dawson. Maybe you can have a seat?" the doctor suggested, seeing Jack's state. Jack shook his head and felt another rush of pain overcome him. He felt like screaming at the top of his lungs. He felt like crying his heart out. But he knew he had to stay strong for Rose and Maggie, now more than ever. Rose had lost her mother and a child in one day. This day would take a lot to get over. The pain would take a lot to overcome. "Can I see my wife?" Jack asked, his voice shaking. "She's in there, Mr. Dawson. She is resting. Please don't wake her. She has a traumatic day." Jack nodded and entered the room and shut the door quietly, so not to disturb her. He could feel the tears rushing down his face. He hushed his sobs and sat beside Rose on the bed. She was asleep. He knew that. Color had drained from her cheeks and her lipstick had been visible on her lips. Her hair cascaded around her shoulders. God, he loved her so much gently. He reached for her hand and kissed it softly before stiffening to another sob. She looked so peaceful, just the way he loved to see her. He hated to see her cry, but he could never bear it. It had been so he knew that when she awoke, she would be weeping again, and probably would be for the next few months. 5 months pregnant? How could he have not known? Rose had talked about gaining weight for weeks now. She had been sick most mornings but blamed the stress of moving. He had seen her without clothes on and they made love and not even noticed a difference in her body. They had not planned another baby, but there was no way he wanted this to happen. Jack knew that he loved all of his children no matter what happened. Images rushed through to Jack, whatever it would have been, a boy or a girl. Who would have it looked like? He could have imagined Megan hoping for a new sibling, and would have been so happy. Pain overcome Jack like never before. This was something he thought he would never experience, the death of his child. Jack glanced back up at Rose and smiled through the pain. He would be there for her to help her through. Together they would grieve. For hours later, Rose awoke from her deep sleep. She found herself no longer in pain, and she imagined she was pregnant and had lost the baby. She was slightly distorted at first where she was, who was holding her hand, and what weight was on the side of the bed. It was Jack. He was holding her hand tightly, and she was asleep on the chair beside her. Rose smiled a little and moved a little to kiss herself to make herself comfortable when a pain shocked her. "Shit!" she cursed, grabbing her stomach. Jack awoke immediately, and his eyes were red and swollen from all the crying he had done. Jack had stood to arrange Rose's pillows to ease her back pain. "Are you all right?" Jack asked rather cautiously, knowing Rose may not want to talk about it. Did she even know? "Yes, I'm fine. I'm just the pain. I know, Jack nodded, immediately placed a comforting arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer than ever. It's real, isn't it, Jack? All of this is real? I didn't dream? Jack nodded, and Rose buried her head in his shirt and began to cry silent tears. She felt empty and hollow now. Her baby was gone. She felt as if she failed Jack and her family, and mostly she had failed herself as a mother. Jack, too, began to weep silently. He couldn't be the strong person he thought he was. He was experiencing the pain and the emotions so strong that he could barely breathe. I don't know, Jack. I didn't know I was preg. But Rose trailed off, sobbing into Jack's shirt. He could feel her body shaking vigorously. He wished with all of his heart that he could dry her tears and take the pain away, but he knew that's something they had both had to deal with. I know, we both didn't know, Rose. I don't blame you. Jack automatically regretted those words as soon as he spoke them. Rose raised her head from Jack's arms and glanced at him. You don't? Rose thought he would blame her. Jack's eyes welled in with shock. He grabbed Rose's hand and placed it on his heart and even touched her mourning face gently. How could she even think of that? Rosie, how could you even think of that? How dare you even think about that? I don't blame you now or ever. This was no one's fault, Rose. Do you understand me? Rose nodded and shamefully hung her head slightly. Jack touched her chin and brought it up to his face to his. Losing this child is the worst thing that's happened to us. We almost died on the Titanic. We found each other. You found your mother before she died. She wouldn't want you to be this upset, Rosie. I know it's hard. I know. I wish I could just take all that pain away. But I can't. We have to mourn for the grief of loss of her wounds before they can be healed. And we have to find some traumatic events in our lives, Rose. We're still very young, but whenever everything happens, I'll be there alongside you. Rose nodded, taking all this information. I love you, darling. I love you so much, Rosie, and I can't bear to see you cry. I never could. It's hard to think that better things right now, but we'll pull through it. Christmas is weeks away, and so is our second anniversary, Rose. Jack laughed this through his tears. He wanted to surprise Rose for Christmas, and he wanted to make one to remember. December 20th, 1914. Today, Jack and I had laid my mother and child to rest. We buried them at the small, lovely church here in Los Angeles. My mother had left Jack, Megan, and I letters. She also left us $30,000 from the money that she got from when she sold the house back in Philadelphia. Jack says he has no idea what to do with that kind of money, but Jack and I have decided that maybe it's time we moved on after this new year. Do some traveling like we always wanted, and once Maggie is too, she'll be able to remember the adventures we will have. Jack has given his notice in on the building company that neither of us will need to be working for a long time. Jack feels as if the money wasn't his, but I assured him that it was ours. Phil doesn't want us to leave, saying that we are like his family. I will miss him dearly too, but there is a big wide world out there, and I want to explore every inch of it, just like Jack and I talked about it. I would love to go to Italy and maybe Paris again, but this time, not just through hotel windows. I haven't cried since the day I lost the baby. I have tried to make myself cry, but I can't. I haven't felt mourned their deaths very well. I do miss my mother already. It wasn't fair how the 2 days have gone together when she was taken from me. God knows how grateful I am when I met Maggie and on how much she loved her. I would have loved her to seen her grow, but maybe God decided it was time for her to go. But I am glad those days with my mother I had, before I saw her for the last time. She told me that she didn't know when we would meet again. Maybe she knew she was going to pass on. I do hope that her and Samuel are reunited. I have always have a deep believing in the afterlife and that our loved ones around us all at the time. I feel my father in some days. The miscarriage hit Jack pretty hard. He hasn't said much in these days. I felt so heartless for feeling that I have to move on soon. I feel that this is for the best. I love my child dearly, and I would do anything to have met it. No pain was even worse than losing a sure child. But I have to continue to be strong for my Maggie. Enclosed are the letters from my mother for Jack and I and Maggie I. Rose Dawson. Los Angeles, CA. Yay, my dearest Rose. How can I begin to describe how happy I am that you came back into my life? I am so proud of you, my dear Rose, for everything. I hope you can be happy now. I hope you can forgive me for all I made you do as a child. I hope you can forgive me for forcing you to a marriage with Mr. Hockley, and for making you feel guilty, and for making your life close to a misery. I was never a good mother, Rose. Not really. When when you were a very young child, I would look at you and saw how you looked at your father. I envied that. And today I just now saw Maggie and looked at you and Jack. It was the same look I gave to your father. You worshipped the ground and walked on. It was then I realized that you are no longer a child, but a woman, a mother, a wife, a happy mother and wife, which to this day and this age is a very rare thing. Hold on to it, Rose, and don't ever let go. I will just feel that may not be on this earth much longer. I am tired, Rose, of all the fighting, the terrible disease. I'm tired of the pain and the pills they give me, which they have never worked. I just wish to be reunited with my love. I feel he waits patiently for me. Look after your family, Rose. Don't even make the same mistakes I did. Care for your children. And Jack. He's a worthy man. I would like to thank you for bringing my granddaughter into my life. I will go now, Rose. We will meet again one day. Until then, I bid you goodbye and good night. Take care. Love always, your mother, Ruth Dewitt Booktaker. Dear Jack, I will just have to start by apologizing for what my words and actions have caused us while being on the Titanic. I should have just accepted a long time ago that you would make my daughter happy, and that you were right with for my daughter. You are a very lucky man, and you are the most beautiful woman in the world, with the ring on her finger. Look after her, Jack. Keep her safe. Look after Maggie. She's the sweetest thing I have ever seen. The way she looks at you, she adores you. I fear my time will come very soon. I am writing to wish you well in the future. Maybe someday you'll become a famous artist, and Rose predicted. Good luck, Jack. Ruth Dewitt Booktaker. My dearest Maggie, by the time you read this, you will have grown into a very beautiful young woman. I was your Nana. I loved you with all my heart, and you are the most specialist thing in the world. I hope you live well, young Megan. Do well and follow your heart always. Enclosed is my engagement ring to your grandfather. Maybe it will bring you a small fortune this in time, or just something to remember your Nana by. Love always, Nana.